Okay, and hello everybody. Nobody is here yet, but we are here for our Wednesday evening Bible study. Elizabeth is here. Hello, Elizabeth. Good to have you with us. And we're going to be continuing our study on Abraham tonight. So we want to look at some things. I want to do a little bit of review. I was asked if, hey, Shonda, I was asked if we could do some more questions and some more reviewing. I sort of didn't do a lot of that in the last time. So why don't we try to do that for this time and do some uh, do some review and see what we can find out. So I have only two people here. I guess I'll go ahead and we'll start with some review questions. And as people come in, maybe we can then go to learning something for tonight. So why don't we start with this? What chapter in the Bible is considered by many to be the hall of fame of the faithful? And hello to Patrick. So I'm going to ask this question. Let's just review what chapter in the Bible is considered to be the hall of fame of the faithful. Let's see if someone comes in with an answer. So that's our first question. What chapter in the Bible is considered to be the Hall of Fame of the Faithful? And if you're at home, you turn and talk to each other and your family and see if you can come up with the answer to that question too. So, what chapter in the Bible is the Hall of Fame of the Faithful? So, we'll see how many we get in on that. What chapter in the Bible is the Hall of Fame of the Faithful? Get some response. Wait a little bit, see if we all can do this. I don't think we have everybody here that's usually in our uh, topic. Hello to Wendy, by the way, and to Emily and Anna. Okay. All right. Got a few answers and got some good, correct answers too. Uh, the answer to that question is Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And that's where we've been going through. So let me ask another question. In this chapter, it says that something is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What is it talking about? The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. What is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen? Good to see Angie Slate with us. Hello. I hope you have all of yours with you. And we have two answers from Angie and Elizabeth. Yes, that is faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Now, we know from elsewhere in this chapter that without faith, it is impossible to do something. So, what is it impossible to do without faith? Without faith, in this chapter, we're in Hebrews again, chapter 11. And if you're not able to respond with the chat, turn in your families and see. Without faith, it is impossible to do something. I got two answers in, and they are different answers. So let's see, let's make sure we got something from this chapter, okay? All right. One answer says works, one answer says please God, one answer says please Him. Now, look, turn your attention to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, okay? Look at verse 6 and see if that gives you the answer. Hebrews 11, verse 6. Without faith, It is impossible to do what? All right. It says please him. And we know that him is God. And not only that, when we come to God, we know that there are two things that we must do when we come to God. According to verse 6, what is it? For he who comes to God must do what two things? There's another question again now. What two things must we do when we come to God? Two things we must do. For he who comes to him must, and then it lists two things. What are those two things? What we're looking for is the answer to this question. When we come to God, according to Hebrews 11, the 11th chapter, there are two things we must do. And I think I've used this, in fact, I know I have. I've used this in some sermons lately. When we come to God. Yes, very good, Elizabeth. Believe, believe that He is, believe in God, and believe that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Not only believe Him, but believe that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So, my next question is this: who is it that being dead still speaks? Who is it that being dead yet speaketh or still speaks? It's a Bible character, a righteous man, and he, being dead, still speaks. I have one answer in, and I hope you're discussing this in your families. Okay, anyone else want to chime in and answer? Who is it that being dead still speaks? Okay. Look at verse 4 and see if that helps you. Look at verse 4 because I have two different answers here, two different people. Who is it, according to verse 4 of Hebrews 11, that even though he's dead, he still speaks? Because we know this is him literally speaking, but through his righteous works, he's still communicating that message to us today. So who is that? That being still, even though he's dead, he still speaks. So let's look at Hebrews 11, verse 4. Let's see if that gets us the right answer. We have two men's names up here. So let me go ahead. Okay. One answer is changed. The answer is Abel. And I like what Elizabeth said. She first said Abraham and said, I took a wild guess, but I see Abel. Sometimes we got to do that. We get an answer and we guess an answer, and then we say, well, I'm going to change that because I see this. All right, Abel. Abel is the one who still, even though he's dead, he still speaks. So I want to ask you something else. Who was it that, according to Hebrews 11, was taken away so that he did not see death? This person did not die. This Bible character did not see death because God took him on as he was. So who was it, according to Hebrews 11, that God took him? He did not see death. According to Hebrews 11. Okay, this asks for a little bit of time. I certainly can give you a little bit of time. Absolutely. The video is delayed, and that happens. So I'm going to give you a little more time. Who is it that who was it that, according to Hebrews 11, was one that did not see death before God took him? And we have two interesting answers. Very good. Very good. All right. Now, the one we're talking about in Hebrews 11 is Enoch. And Angie mentioned Elijah as well. Let's not forget that Elijah also did not see death, went up in a whirlwind. Now, if you read that carefully, it does not say he went up in a chariot of fire, by the way. It says he went up in a whirlwind that came after the chariot of fire. So, uh, Enoch in 11 and verse 5 is the one that we're talking about, who did not see death, and God took him, had this testimony that he pleased God. Okay, so who was it that was warned about things that the world had not yet seen? Who was it that was warned about things that the world had not yet seen? And I'm not going to say anymore because it would be such a dead giveaway. Okay. So, who was it that was warned of things not yet seen? The world had not yet seen that. He was warned of things, and he acted in faith because of, oh, good. Phyllis is here. Hey, Phyllis. And the answer, yes, it is Noah. Noah was warned of things not yet seen. Now I'm going to ask you a question that's going to pick your brain on how much you remember from the lesson we did on Noah. What was it that the world had not yet seen? The world had not seen something, and Noah was told about it. What was it that up until that time, according to God's word, the world had not yet seen? Very good. Oh, good answers. Yes, yes. The answer is rain. Now, that one we're going to have to leave Hebrews chapter 11 to see, but I definitely want to go to that. So let me go to that, and what I'm doing, and we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 6, okay? And we're going to talk about, I want to review what it was that the world had not yet seen. And we had said it was rain. And the reason was that if you look at Genesis chapter 2, and that's where we really need to go first, okay? Genesis chapter 2 and verse 6. Actually, we need to go to verse 5. Genesis 2:5. Before any plant of the field was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth. There was no man to till the ground, but a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Now, this we have the mist, and it wasn't until the flood that we see that it's actually starting to rain. Let's go to Genesis chapter 7 and verse 4, where we see, for after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. We have Genesis 7 again down in verse 12. The rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And in chapter 8 and verse 2, the rain from heaven was restrained. Then we have the word again with the word rainbow. Rainbow. There is a gnat flying right here. A rainbow And God said, I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. So he put that rainbow that was in the cloud. There we see the word rain. We know when it rains, we have a rainbow. So let's review again. What was the rainbow a promise of? That was made by God. God put the rainbow to remind us of a promise. What was that promise? So let you talk about that in your families. And here on the chat sidebar, what was the rainbow a promise of? God said he made his promise and would signify it with this rainbow to Noah. Here was Noah seeing things that the world had not yet seen. Divinely warned of things not yet seen. Of course, he moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Okay. So, all right. So, what was the promise? Good, good, good. We have two answers in. The promise is that God would never again destroy the world with water, and that it would not be with rain. And we know that when he destroys it the next time, the promise is that it would be destroyed, but it will be destroyed by fire. So we have the rainbow as a signifier of that promise. So then we come into a new person in Hebrews 11, a new character, and that in verse 8 of Hebrews 11 is Abraham, and that also is in Hebrews 11:8 and Hebrews 11:11 we see Sarah, Abraham and Sarah. However, as you've noticed since we've been studying Abraham and Sarah, that was not their name at first, was it? So that's my next question. What were Abraham and Sarah called originally? What was their name before? That's my next question. What was their name before it was Abraham, before it was Sarah? So I'm going to give you a minute to find that, look at that, and to chime in here. Abraham and Sarah had a different name. I'm sorry, both of them had different names. And good, the answers are coming in. I'll give a little bit more time as I was just asked. Okay, so his name was not Abraham, his name was Abram. Her name was not Sarah, it was Sarai. Abram and Sarai is who they are called when we first meet them in Genesis chapter 12. So God comes to Abram in Genesis chapter 12, and this is our next question for review. What does God tell Abram to do? God tells Abram to do something. And what does he tell him and Sarai, Abram and Sarai to do? What did God tell Abram to do? Give you uh, a few minutes. I have one answer in. Okay. Good. Good. All right. He told him to leave. Told him to leave his country, to leave his home, and go to a place that I will show you. So he promises him that if he does these things, now for this, we can look at Hebrews chapter 11, that Verse 8 says, he went out not knowing where he was going. And in Genesis chapter 12, when God talks to him, he said, I will make you a great nation. He said, I will bless you. He said, I will make your name great. And he said, you shall be a blessing. He said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. Now, the last sentence I want to ask a question from. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So, my next question is this. When God said to Abram, in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed, who was he talking about? Let me ask it that this way. Through whom did that blessing of all the families of the earth come? So that's my next question. God told Abram, in you, all the families of the earth would be blessed. And who did that happen through? I guess some people would like you to say, through whom did that happen? God fulfilled his promises. And through whom was the whole earth blessed? I have two different answers. Through whom was the whole earth blessed? The whole earth. Through. That one answer is fixing to be changed because somebody said, oh, I think I misunderstood. LOL. Yes. Okay. And these answers are coming in is through Jesus, were all the nations of the earth blessed. And Jesus, of course, through his seed, Jesus was Abraham's seed, yes. And the specific person in that seed was talking about Jesus. So Abram and Sarah go down to the country of Egypt. And we see something bad that Abram did. What sin did Abram do in Egypt to Pharaoh at that time? Abram did a sin. He committed a sin. And what was that sin that Abram did in Egypt when he was there? Okay. Okay. We have the word lied. What did he lie about? Yes, lying was the sin. What lie did he tell? Elizabeth said it. He did tell a lie. What lie did he tell? Give you some time to put this in. He told a lie that what? Yes. Here they come. He told a lie that. Yes. Okay. Good. He said that Sarah, later Sarah was his sister, and the reason he did that was because at that day and time they could have taken his wife and killed him. And God plagued Pharaoh. Pharaoh somehow found out about the lie and sent Abram on his way, and had nothing to do with Abram anymore. One more question, and then I want to go into the lesson. When Abram and Sarah left, they brought somebody with them. Who went with them on their journeys, and how was this person connected to Abram? Who went with Abram and Sarai when they left? who made the journey with them, and how is this person connected, and how is this person connected to Abram? Okay, have one answer in, or half of the answer in. Remember, we want to know how he was connected. Okay, good. Okay, good, good. All right. This was Lot. And who was Lot to Abraham? Lot was Abram's nephew. They were uh, uncle and nephew to each other, and Lot was Abraham's nephew. So now what I want to do is this, and it is always good to review like this. And thank you for your input. Someone told me said uh, that they actually liked having the questions. So by all means, it's a good thing to review and pull us up to where we are, so that we don't just put it aside and forget it after we cover it. And if we review it, we won't forget it after we cover it as well as easily. So I want to look now. What we're going to do this time is look at Genesis chapter 13, and we're going to go on to more of the story of Abraham. We read from Hebrews 11 and 8 that by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. And then verse 9, by faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. Now we're going to look at that because in Genesis chapter 13, we see him going for a trip to parts of the promised land. And when we call it the promised land, this is why. But remember, it was promised to Abram. And so let's look at Genesis chapter 13. And I am going to read the first few verses. We have, in fact, it's not a long chapter. So I'd like to cover this whole chapter tonight. And we'll talk about where Abram goes, and also an incident between Abram and Lot, his nephew. So let's read this. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. They separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. So let's look at this chapter and discuss some things in it. First off, we see here uh, they left Egypt, got kicked out, and everything they had, and Lot went with them. And they go to the south, and we see, of course, Pharaoh gave him some things too. We know, and he already was a wealthy man, but here we see it actually stated. We don't draw the conclusion that Abram was rich. God did for us. It says Abram was very rich, and look what his riches were in: livestock, silver, and in gold. Even by today's standards, such would be wealth. And where he is and living, when he goes somewhere, he has to carry, particularly this livestock, would be quite a feat to carry his livestock, his silver, and his gold. And he goes on his journey from the south as far as Bethel to a place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. Remember, we discussed. No, this was not called Bethel yet, possibly even Ai, but we know that it's just like when Moses wrote these books, he was writing to the audience of people that would be reading it later, and he's writing it for their benefit, just like we write a history book today and list the places that we have now. For example, if I wrote a history book and said something about Birmingham, I would call it Birmingham because that's what we know. Did ancient peoples who lived here call it Birmingham? Absolutely not. Did the natives who lived here call it that? No. We do now, but for the sake of those who are reading it at the time it is written, we call it what it is called presently. And so, no, Moses wrote Bethel, Moses wrote Ai, even though we know that those were not given those names yet, to the place of the altar which he'd made there at first. Now look at verse 4. He made an altar there at the first. Now go down to verse 18. He built apparently another altar to the Lord. And of course, purpose of an altar is for sacrifice. And Abram is sacrificing even more. Now, Abraham appears to be wealthier from Pharaoh, so he has more to sacrifice, more to give. And there he calls on the name of the Lord. Now, I want to say something about him and living in these tents. And I want to talk about these tents that he lived in. Now, we look at tents today, and when we think of tents, we think of a fun thing, going and camping out, and it's also a temporary thing. We do it for, what, a few days, overnight, a few days a week, or whatever. And then we look forward to coming home to a built house. And these tents, however, were their house where they lived. We read of Jacob as one who dwelt in tents. But some of you, and I wonder how many of you could chime in and say, and oh, I didn't see this. Chastity's here. Good to have you, Chastity. Uh, if any of you went with us to the trip down to the LaGrange Museum in LaGrange, Georgia, the Bible Museum, and saw those tents that they made, if anything that was very valuable for, it was to see the fabric that made that composed the tents. This fabric was a very thickly woven wool, and not only was it a thick fabric, it was woven very tightly. So the ins and outs of the fibers over each other left no space for air. And with that construction, you could hold it underwater, and it was so tightly constructed, so tightly woven that water did not go through. It looked as if you could use it as a water bag. And these tents were made out of this, and they would thus shed rain. And I thought that that was one of the most useful, I don't know what to, I don't want to say visual aids, useful displays, I guess, at that museum was the way that the tents that they made were definitely waterproof, and you could literally live in one and not have any type of water coming in. And this was before we had the plastics that we have now and the polyesters and the items that tents were made of now. It was not as light as our tents and it would have been very heavy to carry. Definitely, it would have taken and been more cumbersome in the taking down and the setting up. But it could be done. And when you set it up, you could stay there a while and you could live in these tents. And they didn't have a home. And it's very contradictory in our mindset to think of wealthy people with a lot of silver, with a lot of gold, living in a tent. And yet, these tents were not anything to be sneezed at. We have luxury tents now. It's kind of becoming a fad to. I remember when my brother got married, they had a very large tent with a chandelier hanging down in the middle, and it was where they put tables and had a place to eat, and it was very beautiful, very expensive, very luxurious. These tents have not, in some way, lost their appeal, and it was something that they had that they lived in, and so you're kind of always connected with the outdoors. In the cold weather, you could pull flaps down and keep yourself warm. But I always thought that the tents, that living in the tents, were very interesting. And I always thought it would be uncomfortable. And I also, before I took this trip to LaGrange, Georgia, I'd also always wondered how they would keep themselves dry. But now looking at the construction of those tents, they were, they were very, very well made, and they were they were something that not only Abraham would do. There are people today, and they call them nomads, who still live in these tents and type of tents that are very weatherproof. But Abram lived in tents, and his living in these tents, and Lot would have lived in tents too. Now, let's look at what happens as they're in these tents and they have their flocks, they have their herds. The land was not able to support them. Their possessions were so great that Lot was so wealthy and Abram was so wealthy, and there was strife between their herdsmen. Now, what would there be strife over? Well, what are your basic needs? Well, you have all these animals, and they're going to need food. So there's going to be strife over where we're going to let these animals graze, right? What they're going to eat. Also, animals need water. So there's going to be strife over who gets to the watering hole first. And you have such huge quantities of animals that either Lot's or Abraham's could, drink up a small watering hole, no doubt. And so who gets there first? And some would get there and others would come in. You can picture why there would be strife. Because the land, it says, was not able to support them. Well, the land providing food and providing water, that it just couldn't do it, so that they could dwell together. Their possessions were so great. And here we have the Bible telling us, with great possessions comes great responsibilities, and with great possessions comes trouble sometimes. And how many of us, I'm preaching to myself, need to go through a closet or something, and because our possessions are so great, and maybe need to get rid of some. And that wasn't their case. I'm not saying that. They had another idea. They did not get rid of their possessions, but they did have the idea to separate. And not only that, now look at verse 7. The Canaanites and Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So it looks as if we have a possibility of two more parties of people using the land. The Canaanites and the Perizzites would have had herds and flocks and would have had needs for the land. Some of them could have had gardens, you know. This was before, you know, a few hundred years before they took over, the Israelites took over the land. And so the Canaanites and Perizzites lived there. They would have made use of the land. And here comes these two travelers with such great quantities of animals that they're taking up the land. And so you've got a big problem here. And I like in verse 8 who approaches the subject. Abram does. Abram says to Lot, notice that. And he's the one who's the peacemaker. We see why he's chosen. He's a faithful person, he's a good person. And so, in kindness, he tells Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me. Now, there's where he starts. Before we get with possessions and who gets to what watering hole and all of this, let's let there be no strife between us first. That's most important. And let's go to the next important thing, the people we've hired, the people that are depending upon us for their livelihood. Your herdsman or my herdsman and your herdsman, because we are brethren. Let's don't do this. And look, he says, the whole land is before you. Why are we scrunched up here? Please separate from me, he says. You go one way, I'll go the other. And he lets Lot make the choice. What a good man Abram was. It didn't matter to him as long as he went the opposite direction. And so he tells him, you go one way, I'll go the other way. And you know, Abram really had every right to demand his own choice of direction, but graciously he yielded it to Lot. And this is a different character we see in Abram that we see in the chapter before, where Abram is afraid and he tells lies. And since he's the leader of this expedition, he would be the patriarch of this group that is there, a senior kinsman. He's older than Lot. He would have a right to say which way he wanted to go and tell Lot, I'm going here, you go there. But instead, he lets Lot choose. Now you look at verse 10. Lot lifts up his eyes. He sees Jordan, and it is well watered everywhere. Why would that be important? Again, because of the livestock. And this was before Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And he says that it is like the garden of the Lord. Very likely talking about the Garden of Eden. It was well watered. And this place that Lot looks at is so well watered that it is compared to the garden of the Lord. Now, the garden of the Lord being the Garden of Eden, I want us to go and look back at that. So I'm going, if you would just flip back just a few chapters to Genesis chapter 2 and look at verse 8. The Lord planted a garden eastward in Eden. Let me stop right here. We call it the Garden of Eden as if it is its name. It is in Eden. Eden is the place. The garden is in there. But anyway, he puts man there, and look at the beauty of the garden. Verse 9, out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. God is a God of beauty from the beginning. In this garden, we have beautiful trees, pleasant to the sight, flowering trees, beautifully shaped trees, colored leaf trees, and good for food trees. So we have fruit trees and what all kind of trees that have other types of food on them. And going on to verse, I'm going to skip to verse 10. Says, now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became four river heads. And the next few verses name these four rivers. And so when uh, we see Lot, we see him in Genesis chapter 13. This place that Lot looks at reminds him and is written to remind us of the garden of the Lord. It was well watered. It was plains, it says, and he sees it and he wants to go there and watered everywhere like the garden of the Lord. And it also compares it to the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Now we know Egypt as a dry place, but when you look along the Nile River and some of the other places, it is also a well-watered place along there, and much crops were grown along there. So this land is as good as the land they just left, and is compared even to the land Adam and Eve had to leave, right? Isn't it interesting that both of these places, the Garden of the Lord and Egypt, God's people got kicked out. They get kicked out. Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. Abram and Sarai and his whole company get kicked out of Egypt. And why? Both times, once again, they were kicked out for their sins because of what they did. They get kicked out. And just an interesting comparison between there's Egypt, where they just were, there's the Garden of the Lord, and both places were well watered, but man got kicked out. So Lot sees another place. Now, what this tells us too is something important. The Lord may sometimes remove us from blessings that we have, or remove blessings we have from us. But look what he has done to Lot. He gave him another blessing. Now, this blessing ended up leading to Lot's downfall. But Lot could choose and have this if he wanted it. So they separate, they split, and Lot goes toward the east, and Abram goes toward Canaan, where he probably possibly more where he is there, it looks like. And Lot lives in the cities, and he pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. And when we see Lot in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where there's a door, it looks as if you remember that story, he's in a house. So Lot, by way of the world, has moved up. Now, the Sodom was very wicked, but in physical possessions, Lot seems to have moved up. So when Lot leaves after, and that had to have been a big separation. Yeah, they don't just pick up and, hey, we're going to go. We don't know what all was involved, whether they feasted with each other, cried with each other. We don't know. We can imagine. But after they leave, and Abraham is by himself now with just him and his things and his people, the Lord speaks to him again and reminds him, now I want you to look where you are in every direction, north, south, east, west. He said, everything you see, I'm going to give to you. I'm going to give to your descendants forever. And not only that, your descendants will be as the dust of the earth. No doubt God was pleased with Abram's decision. And he tells him, just get up and walk in it. Walk its length, walk its width. Go see it because it's yours. I give it to you. And so Abram moves here by the terebinth trees of Mamre. And here again, in his awe, in his love of God, he builds yet another altar to the Lord. Lot looked at the attraction of Sodom, chose it as his home. Uh, he, what's the word? Assimilates himself into that society because in Genesis 19 and verse 7, when they are acting so wickedly, he calls them his brothers. And so he acknowledged them as his brothers. He sat in the gate of Sodom in chapter 19, verse 1, which would be not just a place you sit, but a post of responsibility. He had moved up and he did not want to leave there. Psalm 1, verse 1, blessed is man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. There was not where Lot ended up. But Abram is here, and Abram is shown all the land. And no doubt, as he says to walk through the land, uh, he walks through it and he picks a place. Verse 18. Here, he chose this place, Mamre, and these trees, terebinth trees or oaks of Mamre, as some versions say. Uh, Although scholars will say that the oaks here should be rendered terebinth trees. And by the way, some people say, if you want to make a little note there for terebinth, that's where we get turpentine from, turpentine trees. That's very possibly what that's talking about, the turpentine source of, or called turpentine trees. Hebron was a very old city, even when Abram was settling there. And we have to remember how much time has passed through the Earth's history now. It is believed that the pyramids were there when Abram was in Egypt. They are so old. And Hebron was another very old city when Abram settled there. And this situation, not situation, this place, this setup where the trees were, is believed to be about some 2 miles north of Hebron, which is about 19 miles southwest of Jerusalem, where a lot of roads intersected each other. And it would be a very prominent place too. While we look at Lot and say, oh, well, he sure chose a city place. And well, Abram did too. Abram chose a place that was very prominent. It was at the junction of all the principal highways of this region that was southwest of Jerusalem. And you're coming into Jerusalem, and some of those small places would garner a lot of business, just like you come to big cities now, and there are smaller towns out and about it that gets business. Think about like our Love's gas station over here before people go to Birmingham that would stop there and get things there. Well, Hebron was like that. It was 19 miles southwest of Jerusalem, and it would be a prominent place in the landscape. And this would have also been a very important place. And so here we have Abram as he walked through the land. He's going to see a place. He likes this place, and there's where he stays. The people are better. Well, for all we know, the place could have been wealthier, richer. I don't know. I know the people were not so wicked that it made God want to destroy it. And he certainly didn't come into the trouble that Lot came into coming up with being kidnapped and all of this. But here's where we're going to stop because we're at the end of chapter 13. And it says, I have a question here. How do you pronounce the rivers, please? Now, I'm going to guess that this question is referring to the rivers of the area around Eden that watered the Garden of Eden. So let's go back to that. And I'm going to go back to Genesis chapter 2. I'm going to go to verse 10. Now, we have one river that parts and becomes four river heads. Looks as if the, this one river comes out of Eden to water the garden, and it is kind of hard to tell if the main river, excuse me, I choked there. If the main river is watering the garden, or if these four rivers are watering the garden. Either way, this is a huge garden to need just one river to water it. But verse 11, I'm going to pronounce it the way I have always pronounced it. The name of the first is Pishon. It skirts the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And you can imagine people have sought after that for centuries, even today. Where is the land of Havilah, the land of gold? Also bdellium and onyx. And then you have verse 13, Gihon is how I have always pronounced that. Goes around the whole land of Cush. If you want to make a note there on verse 13, Cush is believed to be Ethiopia today. There's that gnat again. Ethiopia. And then you have the third river is the Hiddekel, or some people call it the Tigris. And that either way, the Hiddekel or the Tigris. And it goes toward Assyria. Look how far apart now Assyria and Ethiopia are. You see this expanse of this system of rivers. And then the fourth is the Euphrates or Euphrates. I've heard it pronounced both ways. And this also plays into later time periods when Israel and Judah were in captivity. We'll see the Euphrates River, a very important river, especially in the ancient times, but even so, still today. So, Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates, or Hiddekel, Euphrates, that's the best I can do. Pishon, uh, let me say this, and I've done a lot of studying about this. People say, well, that's the right way, that's the wrong way to pronounce. There are a lot of words we don't know how they pronounced it all, how they pronounced it back in the ancient days, because they didn't have vowels. They only used consonants in their writing. And so whether it could be A-E-I-O-U sound in between them, we don't know. Just a good guess. And so many things we don't know the pronunciation, more so than not. And so I just smile and say, when I have a smart person tell me, well, they're pronouncing that wrong. Okay, well, I'm glad you know how to pronounce it right. Really, we don't. A lot of things we don't know how they pronounced it, but that's the best English sounding pronunciation I can give to it. If you want to call my Southern Alabama English, American English, that's the best I can give to it. But it would have been an amazing network of rivers to behold for sure. The Garden of Eden had to have been something to behold. You are so welcome, Chastity. She said thank you, and I say thank you as we close tonight's lesson on this chapter of Abram's life and where he and Lot separated. And we'll start again next week with that and see what goes on in Genesis chapter 14 as Abram lives in the land of Canaan, and Lot lives in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, where they've split up. And we'll go into Genesis chapter 14, and we'll see what else happens. There's so much on Abram's life. The next chapter is quite exciting, I believe, and yet it's an overlooked, very exciting story of the Bible, and that is Lot's captivity and his rescue. So I want to look at this. Again, this was before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. We're going to also mention a new character that we'll only see one time, and that's Melchizedek. And he comes to play again in the book of Hebrews, not as much in chapter 11 of Hebrews, but somewhere else. We'll look at that next week. So next week, we'll look at an exciting story surrounding Lot, and we're also be introduced to a new character that being Melchizedek. I look forward to having you here with me again. Thank you for tuning in with us. Well, that's the way we used to say it, tune in. That's not the way you do it now. Logging in is what we say now. Thank you for coming with us, and I hope everybody has a very good week. Everybody have a good night, and we will meet, Lord willing, Sunday again at the building at 11 o'clock. We will have a service online here, YouTube, at 2 o'clock. So you go to which one is the most healthy for you, and we hope to see you there. I love you, everybody. May God bless you.